For the students who don't know, this is Myra Crownover. She's a former representative, and she is going to talk to us today about working in Texas politics, representing constituents, all that. So, could you start by just giving students a brief explanation of your career trajectory and how you got to the Texas House of Representatives, what it was like working there?
Um, I got my education degree from SMU and my master's degree from Texas A&M. And in the process, I taught school for 4 years. And my husband and I were married and lived here in Denton, had 4 sons. And one day he decided he wanted to run for state representative. And I told him I thought he was crazy because we didn't have any spare time to start with. And he was getting in the race late, and we needed a lot of help. And so I chipped in and did a lot of work on his campaign. And it was a close election. After he was elected, he was diagnosed with leukemia. And we decided that we would throw all of our energy in to make that work. And so I was his kind of assistant with my education background. Unfortunately, he died after 17 months, and upon his death, a group of people came and asked me to run, and I did. And the rest is kind of history. Okay. So I went in between times, not during the normal time, and it was a stressful time also. But it was a fascinating time, and there's probably nothing to describe being a brand new state rep in Austin and all the things that you have to learn, the people you have to meet, the things you have to do, the things you have to learn. And it was quite an exciting, expanding adventure.
So what does the typical day of a representative look like?
I think that's kind of what I loved about it. There was no typical day ever. So you always had something that you needed to be doing in Denton to meet with your constituents. There was always something that you needed to do in Austin, working in your committees and learning your committees. And there are many, it was just different. There are 150 state representatives, and they each run their offices in very separate ways. There's no way you have to. There's no one way to be a good state representative. I think one of the most important jobs is to be connected with your community. And the other job is to be respected in Austin so that you have influence and that you're at the table when decisions are made.
Yeah. So what was your approach to representing those that voted for you and lived in your district?
Well, we had lived and worked and worshiped and shopped and raised our boys here in Denton, and I felt like I knew a wide sector with all the different ways that we had been involved. So we felt like we knew Denton and loved Denton, loved being here. So that came quite naturally. When I was elected, my chief of staff said, well, you need to find a focus here on what you're going to do. And I said, well, that's not even a question. Our family are who they are because of public schools, public universities, and so we have the wonderful UNT, TWU. We have NCTC in the district, and I also had the State Supported Living Center. So my focus was created without making a choice. That was my area of interest and my area of love, and also the institutions in my district. So that was a perfect match, and I enjoyed that.
So you worked really hard on education issues. That was a really important issue for you, and it matches well with your district, right? So how did you balance? Was it ever difficult to balance the voters with your party leadership, or with the just reality of the legislative process? What was that like?
No, it's always difficult, and I think it's supposed to be difficult. You don't want to go down with one mindset. There's so many issues that your opinion at A is one thing, just your opinion, but as an elected representative, your job is to not act on opinions, but to act on fact, to interview the people that know things that you don't know, to educate yourself, to read the things. And I think also an important goal of mine was always to think long instead of think short, to think not how this will work in 6 months, but will this work in 10 years? Mm-hmm. And is it the best choice? And sometimes those choices are very hard. Sometimes there's not a clear yes, take door A, not door B, because sometimes you can make door A work, you can make door B work, or sometimes door A would fall apart. And it's a very important issue that you have to put your heart and soul and learn from others around you.
Can you give the students like a concrete example of something like that?
Well, one that I still find interesting was I decided to carry the smoke-free workplace bill.
Okay.
And that was a bill. I tried to be very respectful. I'm a Republican. Mm-hmm. Republicans believe in less government, not more government, less regulations. But we have all sorts of regulations that are absolutely vitally important in our restaurants about refrigeration of food, rats and mice in a restaurant. So I thought this was just a logical next step. Now that we know absolutely for positive that secondhand smoke kills people.
Right.
And I didn't think it was a reach. We tried to keep it very, very narrow. It was just enclosed spaces. Mm-hmm. It was just workplaces. And the people I always had in mind were a restaurateur, a bartender, a waitress that needed their job, that didn't have just the ability to go, oh, it smells bad in here, I'm going to go get another job.
Right.
And that's what I was told many times, just tell them to go get a different job. And I said, well, you probably haven't been a waitress lately, and you would know that that's many times not possible. We're trying to put food on the table here. So, but it was kind of a reach for the state of Texas. And I absolutely believe in individual rights. Mm-hmm. But there's also the other hand of individual right is individual responsibility. I can't imagine anybody. But you have to remember this was a while back. And so people were quite critical and said that I was telling them whether to smoke or not.
Right.
I said, no, I absolutely was not. I'm just saying this lovely lady that is serving your drink does not want to smoke, and she may be pregnant or all sorts of things. And so anyway, it was an issue, and many people disagreed with me. Yeah. And that's fine. I was able to get it out of the House. I was never able to get it out of the Senate. But the good part was we got a lot of coverage at the time. And we did a survey, and 70% of Texans agreed that we should have smoke-free workplaces simply because of the health benefits. We knew that it cost the state of Texas $30 million a year just in Medicare expenses alone from one survey. And we just absolutely rock solid knew that secondhand smoke kills people. Right. And I still wasn't able to get it passed. But since then, sometimes, and I was disappointed, deeply disappointed about that. But sometimes the conversation is also even more important than the law.
Right.
And the conversations have changed the way people look about it and think about it. And during that day, 19% of the people in Texas smoked. and now just 13%
Yeah.
smoke. So we've made great progress. And about the time we're making great progress, and the e-cigarettes come along and erode some of the progress, which is I'm still working with smoke-free people and the tobacco prevention. And I think that's an important thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great example of two things that we talk about in our classes, which is, that sometimes things could be, popular with your constituents, even if you knew that so many Texans supported it, right? But somehow politically difficult. And then two, you said, well, we got the conversation going, right? So I guess the power of agenda setting is something that we talk, right? That you have the power not just to pass law, but also to direct attention and raise awareness and conversation.
To use the bully pulpit.
Yeah.
For education.
Yeah. So was there a time when you had to make a decision that went against public opinion? And how did that affect the way that you approached your job or approached your next campaign or, just did things?
Well, there are many times where I think it's hard to gauge public opinion because sometimes the people that are very passionate and very involved are very loud, and the people that are rather ambivalent about it, you don't usually gauge the ambivalent votes, and they are not as verbal or as usually as organized. So there are times when you have to. So we are a representative democracy. We're not a pure democracy.
Right.
So you are elected to go find out the things that other people don't know, to educate yourself and to talk to other people and to think long. What are the long? I think just a real goal is that thinking 20 years out, not tomorrow.
Right.
And so that's I think it's important that you educate yourself and think long and you don't just always put your finger up and see which way the wind is blowing, because sometimes the wind can blow in different ways that are not helpful.
So does it change how if you know that you have a loud, opposition, even if they're a minority, but they're going to be loud, does that change how what your strategy is?
It makes it more difficult. One example I would think is the different ways intelligent people can talk and think about toll roads, because toll roads became a very heated topic. And so you could have 3 different intelligent people that had paid time and attention to the topic and could argue. There are many, many different sides, but some people felt absolutely that toll roads were an additional tax and that they had already paid for the roads and they shouldn't have to pay for them twice.
Sure.
I can understand that. Some people thought that that North Texas was going to drown in transportation difficulties, and it was going to affect our businesses and our freedom of movement. And they looked at the choices, and toll roads weren't our first choice, but that was better than nothing. And I think the leadership in North Texas decided we were not going to be bogged down. And there's another thought, that a more pure thought, I guess pure is not the right word, but so transportation is absolutely a responsibility of the state, and we need to pay for it. And I think paying for it directly would actually be the most cost-effective way in the long run. But that was, the politics is the art of the possible, not the perfect.
Right.
And so in those 3 choices, I think the toll roads were the possible. But you could argue the 3 different sides, and nobody would be wrong, nobody would be misleading, nobody would be just promoting their own agenda.
They're all correct.
Right.
But there's...
But you have to think long what works 20 years out.
Right. And so how did you go about talking about that when you had to deal with that in your district or, things like that?
Well, I think our choice was to have gridlock and be stuck.
Right.
Where you couldn't know whether you could get to Dallas in an hour or an hour and a half. And I think it's truly a user fee. Nobody has to use a toll road, and I am delighted to use those express lanes and have control over my time.
Sure.
And also we worked closely with businesses because the gridlock is quite a problem. If you can't get your products to your store, if you can't get what you produced away, and your even lawyers, if carriers are stuck in traffic, medical, if you have a hospital down the street but you can't get there, you have a problem.
Sure.
So I think the leaders of North Texas worked carefully together in a respectful way, and we probably did as well as we could have done.
Yeah. So do you ever find that your gender affected the way that you approached your job or the way that others, voters, politicians, administrators worked with you?
Good question. So I was the wife for 30 years, and we had 4 sons. And my joke was that I had the perfect training to be a legislator because I had lived with 5 alpha males for all those years, where everybody wanted to be the boss, and that is certainly the way it is in Austin. I have always tried not to think of myself as a female legislator. I tried to think of myself as a legislator. I had a wonderful, wonderful assistant who was 5 feet tall and a Hispanic, and she had been one of the few Hispanics in her high school. And she had always said that she just didn't give anybody permission to look down on her because she was Hispanic or a woman or short. And I tried to use her as my mentor there. And I tried to conduct myself in a respectful way.
Yeah.
And I expected the respect to be returned. And I think that worked.
Good. That's great.
So that is not to say there are not disadvantages.
Right.
So different men are different than women, and they always will be. And they have different talents and different abilities. But I think what I hope where we will go after many discussions, I think the winners are going to be men that know how to work with women and respect women. And the other winners will be women that know how to work with men and respect men. And I actually think that's where, I hope that is where we are going.
Okay. So how did you decide which bills to sponsor and which issues to pursue? I mean, you said that education kind of fell into your lap based on your training and your district, and just it was the obvious choice for you. But other than that, how did you have a myriad of options? How did you decide which ones to pursue?
Well, you want to pick your hill to die on. It needs to be worth your time and attention, and your staff. Your staff spends more time on it than you actually do. So I tried to always use the interest of my staff also.
Okay.
We had a funny bill that a dad came to me and said, I went to my child's program and her name wasn't on the list because we had divorced and the mother was changed her last name. And from that bill, we thought about how you should handle that. And I was trying to protect the school systems because they didn't want those fights in the administration office. So we came up with a very simple bill that said that a child needs to be enrolled by their legal last name. So if there's a problem between the parents, the school is not the place that should be debated.
Yeah.
It should be debated in the courts.
Yeah.
And I thought, such a little common sense bill. And we got so many thank you notes from dads.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, it was a learning experience for me. I
never have expected that.
I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
So just that's the beauty of the randomness of every day. You can't tell who will walk in your door, what issues you. And it's a lot like being in the press, where an issue blows up and you didn't know anything about it on Monday. Tuesday you're reading real fast, and by Wednesday you need to know more about it than most people. Wow. So it's quite a lovely education.
Did you find that constituents brought you things frequently?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think that's really important, to be in connection with what your constituents are thinking. Well, that was just a dad that brought me that problem.
Yeah.
And fortunately, my staff, I would say anybody should never underestimate staff.
Right.
Never feel like, I just got to talk to the staff, because probably the staff is going to do
a lot of
the
work,
lifting.
Don't they?
Yes. Yeah. But so, fortunately, I had a great staffer that listened to the concern of that dad and saw that could be a problem, not just for that dad, but others.
Yeah.
And that was something that we didn't want the school system to have to deal with.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it was a tiny little nothing thing.
Right? Well, what do you think that more people should know about the policymaking process in general?
Policymaking is deep and heavy and dense and not obvious. I think what concerns me right now is people that have very strong opinions with not enough knowledge. There were many times where a member would come to Austin thinking they had the goods on something. Right. And then when you get educated, you realize how complex it is. Right. And sometimes there is a problem here, but there is not a way to solve it by passing legislation.
Yeah.
And it will remain a problem, but sometimes common sense and self-respect and education is the way to solve it instead, because sometimes you will think of a bill that you would like to write, and there's just no way to write it. It's hard to explain, but you just can't get there from here.
Right. Not every issue can be easily regulated.
Right. And I think the bathroom bill is a perfect example there, that's not something that you need to treat people with respect, common sense, and
you might have moral perspectives on it, but it can be very difficult to regulate that. How do you actually go about enforcing, or the practical day-to-day implementation aspect of policymaking is complicated too.
You can cause more trouble by writing a bill than you would do a bill to solve a problem, but you may create problem A, problem B, problem C down the road that unintended. I think one word that I always kept was unintended consequences. So there are always unintended consequences.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
So I was always amazed at that.
Absolutely. So what else would students be interested in? What might they not know or not think to ask about? What's something that they might be curious about or interested in that you could tell them about?
About being the representative?
Yeah.
It is a wonderful, chaotic, during session especially, it's a wonderful, chaotic, high intensity. I remember one time I was in my office and Governor Perry walked in, and I thought, wow, that doesn't happen every day.
Yeah.
I was working on a bill, and I was able to visit with Dr. DeBakey. And you thought, oh my gosh, there's only one Dr. DeBakey. Right. And here I am talking with him. Just interesting experiences like that. And I had a wonderful time. I don't know why I thought of this. So somebody had sent lunch up, and I didn't have time for lunch, and there was some military people, 2 men and their wives. They were visiting the Capitol. So I had them have lunch in my office.
Sure.
and that was, they were like,
Yeah.
what? So very extraordinary things. You have to, if you're curious and aware, you can just never tell what kind of blessing will fall on you.
Right.
And then there's some curses that follow you also.
Sure.
That are, but there are many times that are very emotional, where somebody with all their heart and soul and strength have gathered the courage to come work on an issue that is very personal or very painful, very pressing to them, and you are invited into their lives.
Right.
And it is very touching, and I think it's a sacred responsibility.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, glad to do it.